My final project is on Sir John A. Macdonald and his impact. This is my artifact, which is a portrait that I made of John A. Macdonald. Geography of Canada. Settlement in the prairies. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald's goal to establish Canadian sovereignty over the recently acquired Northwest Territories included encouraging British and European immigrants to settle on the prairies. The Hudson's Bay Company transferred the territories to Canada in 1869, stretching from Ontario's border to British Columbia. Settlement was critical, as was the construction of a railway to transport settlers west. There was already talk of extending north of the border in the Midwestern United States. British Columbia joined Confederation in 1871 thanks to Sir John's promise of a Trans-Canada Railway. Indigenous Plains. The prairies were in the grip of one of the biggest human tragedies in Canadian history when Macdonald took office for the second and last time in 1878. The Indigenous Plains had lost their main source of food, clothing, and shelter due to the rapid loss of bison, which was mostly caused by American overhunting. The famine was not caused by Macdonald. He also didn't write the Indian Act or most of the West treaties. He did, however, profit from the famine-stricken plains thanks to the Canadian Pacific Railway. Industrial Revolution and the Canadian Pacific Railway. The National Policy. The Conservative Party's major economic and political strategy under John A. Macdonald and his government was known as the National Policy. The policy consisted of three parts: the construction of the CPR, a strong immigration policy to fill the West, and high tariffs to preserve the developing Canadian industry. The policy's goal was to establish a true country with a national economy. The occupation of the immense plains of the West, according to Macdonald, was a fundamental national interest. The construction of the CPR would ensure Canada's authority over the territory, and the Eastern industry would have access to the West's resources and customers. The Pacific Scandal. The Pacific Scandal was Canada's first significant political controversy after Confederation. In April 1873, Sir John A. Macdonald and top members of his Conservative cabinet were accused of taking electoral funding from shipping magnate Sir Hugh Allan in exchange for the Canadian Pacific Railway concession. In November 1873, Macdonald was forced to resign as Prime Minister due to the scandal. However, it did not derail his political career, as he returned 5 years later to serve as Prime Minister for another 18 years. The Fur Trade and European Imperialism. Rupert's Land. Rupert's Land was a vast territory of northern wilderness. From 1670 to 1870, it was the Hudson Bay Company's exclusive commercial domain and the fur trade's key trapping areas. The Government of Canada purchased Rupert's Land from the HBC for $1.5 million 3 years after Confederation. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald governed the Dominion of Canada. His government became increasingly eager to annex Rupert's Land to the Dominion to expand the nation's northern and western borders. Louis Riel. Louis Riel was a Canadian politician, the founder of the province of Manitoba, and the Métis people political leader. He led 2 uprisings against the Canadian government and its first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald. As the Northwest Territories steadily came into the Canadian sphere of influence, Riel attempted to defend Métis rights and identity. For his role in the 1885 opposition to Canadian encroachment on Métis territories, he was hanged for high treason. Canadian Confederation. The Great Coalition. The Great Coalition was a political alliance that brought the two Canadas together in 1864. The last coalition administration had collapsed after only 3 months, demonstrating that continuous control of Canada East and Canada West under the 1840 Act of Union was impossible. Partnership was formed between Georges-Étienne Cartier, John A. Macdonald, and George Brown and the Clear Grits to alter the political system. In the pursuit of constitutional reform, the partnership brought together reformers and conservatives. It paved the way for the Charlottetown Conference and Confederation. The British North America Act. The British North America Act is now known as the Constitution Act 1867. It was the law passed by the British Parliament on March 29, 1867 to create the Dominion of Canada. It came into effect on July 1, 1867. The Act is the foundational document of Canada's Constitution. Although John A. Macdonald's involvement as the driving force behind the British North America Act is sometimes exaggerated, he was instrumental in its formulation. Initially opposed to Confederation, Macdonald changed his mind in 1864 and the Great Coalition was born. The change displayed his political flexibility as well as his vision. American Revolution. The American Civil War. The American Civil War was fought between the northern states and the southern states who left the U.S. in 1860 to 1861. John A. Macdonald's support for a strong central authority was strengthened by the tragedy of the American Civil War. The Civil War's tensions, as well as the danger of an American invasion, pushed Canada to form its own confederation and gain independence. Manifest Destiny. The concept of manifest destiny symbolized America's entitlement to spread throughout all of North America. Politicians and residents in the United States urged the country to grow by seizing British land. The province of Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia were included. After the United States bought Alaska from Russia in March 1867, Canadian worries of American expansion grew. However, after Confederacy, the prospect of an American invasion decreased. It also decreased during the reign of Sir John A. Macdonald and the Federal Conservative Party. In 1879, he introduced the national policy which protected Canadian manufacturers from American competition. History of British Columbia. The Klondike Gold Rush. The discovery of gold in the Yukon Territory in 1896 prompted one of the world's most frantic gold rushes. Between 1897 and 1899, it also caused a stampede in the Klondike region. In 1869, John A. Macdonald's administration announced intentions to establish a 200-strong mounted police force to preserve peace along the border. During the gold rush, the Northwest Mounted Police played an important role in law enforcement, controlling the booming city of Dawson and monitoring the Yukon Territory. Canadian Pacific Railway construction. After Prime Minister John A. Macdonald promised to build a transcontinental railroad to connect British Columbia to the rest of Canada, the province joined Confederation in 1871. The railway, which was finished in 1885, linked eastern Canada with British Columbia and played a significant role in the country's development. The railway helped communication and transit across the country and was built under dangerous conditions by thousands of laborers, including 15,000 Chinese temporary workers. This is my timeline, which includes all the events and topics I talked about in this presentation. And these are my references for the project.